Brussels, Europe's hub of political activity at the heart of the 2024 debate, as the continent heads to the polls, making a choice between a wide panel of candidates to stand as the future MEPs, both left and right. This is the story of the 2024 vote, starting in a post-Brexit Scotland, taking us to the cobblestones of Brussels and the markets of France, where the story veers to the right and slightly off-piste.
Proposing simple answers to complex questions.
People aren't quite sure who to vote for.
Of course, in many countries we see the rise of the far right because we have had a decade of crisis.
Europe, where next? I'm born Scottish but adopted French, and I've been living on the continent for over 10 years. And I'm keen to see what is happening in this critical vote in which Brits cannot participate since Brexit.
The European movement in Scotland, we're part of the wider European movement in the UK and across Europe. We see our role as campaigning. So obviously we've had our work cut out over the last few years, and one of our aims, our main aim, is to get Scotland and the UK as a whole back into the European Union, but also we see ourselves as a source of information, an unbiased source of information on Europe. I remember the night very well. I mean, I was distraught. I didn't think this was going to happen. I remember, I came back from the couch, and I cried because I really, it meant, so much to me. And I went out for a walk that morning, and I met a neighbour, and he said to me, but David, we're European, and I think that really does make a difference up in Scotland.
Bittersweet for those 62% of Scots who voted Remain, with these Europeans talking of the upcoming poll. For some Brits, the grass may just always seem a little greener. Why is it important to vote in the EU elections?
Because my voice or my opinion counts, and everybody's opinion counts.
Of course I'll be voting in the EU elections. They are absolutely important for democracy, of course.
And as for these younger continental Europeans settled in Edinburgh, they tell me many simply won't go to the polls, or sometimes can't because they're abroad.
There's definitely a significant amount of people, at least of my generation, that are not necessarily voting. There's maybe a lack of interest, a lack of trusting politics, nowadays politics. People feel that it's quite old.
So are you voting in the EU elections?
I would like to, but for Italy, they don't give the right to vote. We could go to the embassy here in Edinburgh, so I could vote, but they don't give you the chance to do that.
I feel that definitely there should be more interest, especially from young people in European politics, because me and my friends, we have the interest to vote, and most of my friends are voting, but I feel that still they are not enough involved and informed into what they are voting for.
These young people here in Edinburgh are concerned not only about the elections that are in a couple of weeks' time, but also about the future of the European project. Concern within Europe, disquiet within Europe, possibly about turnout and the far right. What are your thoughts?
More people possibly are going to vote for far-right parties, but they're not going to be anywhere near a majority. So you've got to remember, the majority of Europeans are supporting parties that propose sensible, centrist ways of dealing with the problems that we face in Europe as a whole.
And to the continent we go, stopping off in a grey Brussels where the weather speaks something of the political climate. Beth, a Brit living in Belgium, tells me of her concerns not being allowed to vote.
You really feel like more of an outsider, if I can put it that way, having to apply for visas, and obviously with the EU elections coming up, everyone's talking about who they're going to vote for. You see all the campaigns, and knowing that even though I'm living here, and the decisions that are taken at an EU level affect me directly, I can't be involved in that decision-making process. Being an LGBT person, I do see a lot of examples of people in the community being used as like games of political football, and that is something that concerns me as well, the so-called culture wars and the people who get caught in the crossfire.
Getting Europeans to go to the polls in the parliamentary elections every 5 years needs a marketing plan where the sky's the limit. But as this Polish Brussels-based journalist tells me, the institutions have had a tough ride recently, and ultimately, turnout isn't that bad.
The term started with Brexit. The negotiations were ongoing, and then there was COVID, the pandemic, and then of course we had the war in Ukraine with all its implications on energy sector, for example. So not only on the security. And here is an international organization. Just imagine if, for example, there was a parliamentary assembly at the United Nations, and you ask all the members, all the countries of the world, members of the United Nations, to choose their politicians for the Assembly General, and then half of the citizens of all the countries of the United Nations went to vote. That would be amazing, and this is what is happening in Europe.
The marketing offensive goes all out with a Eurovision debate fit for a Eurovision Song Contest, with some well-known faces. And those in the Brussels bubble arriving in droves.
This debate is designed to test lead candidates for the European Commission presidency to the full, to see if they're up to one of the most demanding jobs in world politics.
But to get that job, they need their MEPs to back them. The European Parliament is elected by list proportional representation across the EU, and there are 720 seats in total, divided across the bloc based on population. MEPs from national parties then come together in political groups around the same values and ideas, and they remain in office for 5 years. In terms of polling in the run-up to the election, the current makeup shows that the EPP and S&D blocs, centre-right and centre-left, are holding the fort. But a shift is being forecast to the far right with ECR and ID, plus a decrease in Greens and centrist Liberal Renew seats. A definite step to the right being projected.
We're everything that the extremes are not. And we're trying to, I like this phrase, in medio stat virtus. It means in the middle is the strength. And this is why I joined the Centre Party.
Far-right is the same around the globe. They're there to destroy our democracy, to fight against our fundamental rights and values, and now they also want to destroy what we have done in terms of protecting the climate and the planet.
Sitting here on the seats outside the European Parliament, the question is about the seats on the inside, and ultimately what the makeup will be like in a few weeks' time. Questions on turnout, questions on the far-right vote. A lot of pomp and circumstance here in Brussels, but it's really in the home countries where the campaign trail is truly alive. I actually first came to Lille, or just outside of it, in Ville-of-Dasque, when I was 16 on a school exchange. And I was with a family where the parents were both teachers, socialist, left-wing, very much the case of most people living in Lille. But today I'm travelling to Hénin-Beaumont, just to the south of Lille, which has gone through deindustrialisation and the closing of many coal mines over the years. It's a city that has moved right, it's a city that's moved far right. And today, the campaign rally with Jordan Bardella leading up the list for the far right in France. I'm going to go and see what all the fuss is about.
Pendant 30, 40, 50 ans, c'était une ville qui était extrêmement riche pendant toute l'ère industrielle. Et le jour où les industries sont parties, c'est-à-dire la fermeture des mines, la fermeture des grandes industries comme la métallurgie, etc., en fait, il n'y a pas eu de reconversion économique ici.
Sur l'Europe, le parti a changé de stratégie. Pourquoi ce changement et où en êtes-vous sur la discussion sur ce sujet aujourd'hui?
Si vous voulez, au bout d'un moment, c'est vrai que pendant très longtemps, on a considéré que la sortie de l'Union européenne était sans doute la meilleure des solutions. Mais on voyait bien que les Français n'y étaient pas prêts et que pour eux, c'était une prise de risque supplémentaire. Alors, ça ne veut pas dire qu'on change nos convictions, mais à partir du moment où les Français sont opposés à une mesure, pourquoi continuer finalement à la proposer ?
The National Rally will be hoping to turn the elections upside down, inside out and round as sympathisers of all ages file into the town's leisure centre.
Chers amis, il y a une conviction entre toutes qui ne m'a jamais quitté et que je vous rappellerai autant de fois qu'il faudra. Unis, les Français sont invincibles. 9 juin, la règle est simple. Un seul jour, un seul tour, un seul vote, Jordan Bardella.
Le 9 juin sera un vote d'espérance, un vote pour l'identité de la France contre la submersion migratoire, un vote pour le pouvoir d'achat et contre l'inflation, un vote pour exister face au risque de l'effacement, un vote pour que la France vive face à ceux qui voudraient voir sa disparition, un vote pour l'avenir face au déclin, un vote pour l'Europe des nations contre l'Europe.
Eh bien, tout simplement, c'était ramener dans le monde politique. Et c'est ce que je dis souvent, il ne faut pas que ce soit le citoyen qui aille vers le politique, mais le politique qui va vers le citoyen.
À 28 ans, il est jeune, on est jeune aussi, donc on s'identifie forcément à lui. Et ses idées mises en place, elles sont plus intéressantes que dans les autres partis.
Thank you very much for joining me. Perhaps first of all you could introduce yourself.
Of course, I'm Nathalie Braak. I'm a professor of political science and EU studies at the University Libre de Bruxelles and at the College of Europe. So as far as what is the far right, usually we recognize three main elements. So the first one is nativism, basically that the state or the nation should be composed of native people. Second one is authoritarianism, so a strong state with law and order. And the third element is populism, so the idea that society is divided between good people and corrupt elite, and that politics should be the general will of the people.
With the polls suggesting that a number of countries will return far-right candidates. Why is this? Have there been recent crises that have fed into their possible success?
Yes, there has been, but I think we need to remember that despite the name European elections, we're still having 27 national elections, and that each national setting is very different. The context of crisis is a fertile ground for far-right parties, as they can mobilize on this sense of crisis as they being the savior of the people. And they also feed on discontent and resentment. The figure of Jordan Bardella, he's a fresh face, he's young, so he's attracting a lot of young votes. He's presented as more moderate, also more respectable. His appearance is important. He's charismatic, whether one likes it or not. He's very active on social media, especially on TikTok.
Votre sécurité sera demain ma priorité.
Le problème des bonbons, c'est que ça redescend après. Ça, c'est censé tenir en énergie. Et pour en débattre 2h30.
Elsewhere, Macron's centrist party, polling for a defeat, may need more than cereal bars to keep them afloat.
On suit les sondages, c'est vrai que c'est plutôt compliqué, mais on est là pour essayer de déjouer les sondages et essayer de faire le maximum pour obtenir le plus de voix possible jusqu'à dimanche.
Notre liste a des racines très fortes et des ailes très fortes si vous nous aidez dimanche. Donc mobilisez-vous, parce que, évidemment, ici, j'imagine que vous êtes convaincus, mais allez chercher vos parents, vos amis, vos collègues, etc. Parce que chaque fois compte, parce que nous pouvons continuer la transformation européenne grâce à votre engagement.
Immigration, farming and cost of living. Those have been the big issues traded throughout the debate and pulling in interest from all sides, even if the parties are, most certainly, not singing from the same hymn sheet.
It's Saturday the 8th and Europe is already going to the polls. Here in France, they'll cast their votes tomorrow and Sunday the 9th. In the meantime, a campaigning and media blackout as we allow people to ponder on where they will cast that vote. But the music goes on. À voter.
France goes to the polls, but while the turnout figures will be watched closely, Guardian journalist John Henley tells me how polling on the vote hasn't really budged in recent times.
They show that Marine Le Pen's national rally, le Rassemblement National, is set to score really a resounding win. There should be a slight caveat about this in that the European elections have traditionally, almost since their inception, served as a kind of low-cost opportunity for voters to give the government of the moment, the government that's in power at the moment, a good kicking. But I think that, generally speaking, if you look at the polls for the next presidential elections in France in 2027, they're also showing Marine Le Pen ahead of pretty much every possible rival at the moment. And I think, Emmanuel Macron is halfway through his second term. It's completely understandable that voters are turning against him. But what is alarming, I guess, is that the only realistic-looking alternative at the moment is a far-right party.
So is France really an exception with this trend?
Interestingly enough, France isn't an exception. The far-right is on the rise. Far-right parties are on the rise across Europe. What's interesting, though, I think, is that they are very, very starkly divided once they reach the European level. Within Europe, within the European Parliament, the far-right parties cannot unite.
By that evening, at a venue in suburban Paris, smooth jazz playing, some were preparing for a party. While at Macron's HQ, there was relief to learn that they came out second and not third at the exit poll.
French citizen regarding regarding the European Union, and that's what's really important.
But the damage was done, a clear defeat. What came next shook the room.
De la relance économique, de la protection commune de nos frontières. C'est pourquoi, après avoir procédé aux consultations prévues à l'article 12 de notre Constitution, j'ai décidé de vous redonner le choix de notre avenir parlementaire par le vote.
The French values, and I believe that it's around the President Macron that we can build a better future for all the generation.
What do you think of this choice?
I think it's actually a good choice because he listens his country, so we want to act for them and listen to them. But I'm very afraid of what is going to be after that because I don't think we're going to win. I don't think so.
A seismic shift for France with wider implications. But back at the EU Parliament, the new makeup was becoming clear, with gains for the far right, returning an additional 23 seats in the ECR and ID groups, and significant losses for the Greens, losing 18 seats, and the centrists Renew losing 26 seats.
The lofty corridors here in the European Parliament feel somewhat empty today as the press huddles have now left for election night, and we're waiting at the same time the arrival of the new MEPs.
We have to organize stability for Europe. That's the main message. The challenges are huge, are really huge, probably even historic. And in this moment, we have to organize then reasonable majorities. The key element for achieving now results on content is what people told us during the election campaign. That's the idea of democracy.
You exclude a collaboration with ECR because you said far right. Does it include ECR or is it just ID?
Yes, we have been clear that we also don't want ECR to be part of the majority for the next European Parliament.
Who should lead the European Commission?
I think the Council is wise enough to see what the signal was. That was the signal of the voters. So more right-wing and less Green Deal, etc.
And what do you expect?
Do you think the democratic situation in France is a problem also for Europe? The situation
in France is splendid for us.
On the streets in Brussels, the younger voters looking to the future of Europe talk of division and tricky times ahead.
For the issues that I found important, time is not on our side, and I feel that now for the next 5 years we didn't go in the right direction.
I think people are losing their collective identity in a way that we're so divided and there's so many subcultures of sub-identities, and I think that makes people confused.
We've seen like an increase in right and far-right parties in the number of votes, and well, I think that's quite scary.
And I think far-right has a lot of easy, quick fix solutions.
The fallout in Europe is maybe not as great as some have predicted. The centre blocs have been able to hold on to the reins of power for the time being. What's happening in France is a sign of the times: fragility, division and radicalism. Just how will the European project cope with the carnage in one of its founding nations?